long pinions,
Rich.
yeah, color. And he comes to Lebanon. Now, why do you suppose he would come to Lebanon and not to Jerusalem? Why would the eagle come to Lebanon? Does that...
Lebanon cedar.
What's that, Namshin?
I mean, the tree, the big tree.
Yeah, the big tree.
Cedar.
The cedars of Lebanon. Does anybody remember what Jehoiakim's palace is called? The House of Lebanon. Because the entire king's fortress, king's palace, and the house of the Lord are both paneled with cedars of Lebanon. That's why the great eagle comes to Lebanon. And he took away the top of the cedar. Okay. When I read this, I'm thinking the top of the cedar. If we're talking the majestic cedars of Lebanon, that would be the king of Lebanon. But he's not talking about Lebanon actually. He's talking about Jerusalem. Particularly in the sight or the hearing of the people who are in exile in Babylon, he's taken the king away. Took away the top of the cedar, plucked off the topmost of its young twigs. Young suggests a young king. Okay, now it doesn't say the word Jehoiakim, but it seems to suggest that. And brought it to a land of merchants. The Chaldeans are known as merchants. And he set it in a city of traders. They're also called traders. So here goes Jehoiakim to this place that the people who are in Babylon, they are now living in this land of merchants and a city of traders. He also took some of the seed of the land. And he planted it in a fertile soil. He placed it beside abundant waters. He set it like a willow. Again, we're continuing this natural view as opposed to a human. We're not talking human. It's a riddle, an allegory. Plants it beside waters. It sprouted. It became a low spreading vine. Okay, now let's see what we can do. If you take a pine cone from a Lebanon cedar and you plant it where it's well watered, what do you expect to get out of it?
High.
Yeah, a high Lebanon cedar. This does not grow a Lebanon cedar. What does it grow? A low spreading vine, which seems to be like either a grapevine or some kind of vine that grows along the ground. It doesn't grow up into a cedar. It became a vine, it yielded shoots and sent out branches. Verse 7, here's where we get the tension. We have the one great eagle with the long pinions and the variegated colors, and now we have another eagle. When one eagle flies into another eagle's area, what happens?
Conflict.
There is going to be a conflict. Somebody is going to take a whooping, all right? Because somebody's got to be the king. You can't have two king great eagles in the same space. With another eagle with great wings, much plumage, behold, this vine bent its roots toward him. Now, who do you think the second, if the first eagle is Nebuchadnezzar, who's the second eagle? Yeah, it's Egypt. It's the Pharaoh of Egypt. And the vine bends its roots towards Egypt, sends out its branches toward him from the beds where it was planted, that he might water it. This is a request for support from the king or the Pharaoh of Egypt. Well, how's that going to go over with Nebuchadnezzar? Remember, Nebuchadnezzar Hiphiel Galaz, the people, and Nebuchadnezzar Hiphiel Melech Zedekiah, after he changes his name. So the question is asked by the prophet. We're here in verse 7. It was planted in good soil beside abundant waters, that it might yield branches and bear fruit and become a splendid vine. And then we have the question in verse 9. Notice who's saying this. Verse 9. Look at the messenger formula. Thus says the Lord God. It's not just Ezekiel. Ezekiel is God's spokesman. But when you get the messenger formula embedded in a prophetic discourse speech, prophetic discourse frequently comes up in a term called reeve. Resh Hirak Yod Beit. A reeve is a prophetic accusation against someone who's done something wrong. When the prophet is doing a reeve and in comes the wording, thus says the Lord God, Ko Amar Adonai Tzevaoth, you're not looking at the same kind of intensity. So the Lord asks the question, will this young vine thrive? The expected answer is yes or no?
No.
No. When God cuts covenant, or when a king cuts covenant, if you break the covenant, you better be prepared to pay the time. Will he not pull up, now this would be the first eagle, will he not pull up its roots, cut off its fruit so that it withers, so that all its sprouting leaves wither, and neither by great strength nor by many people can it be raised from its roots again? Though it's planted, will it thrive? Will it not completely wither? And pretty clearly, that's what's going to happen. Now, go ahead. Was there a question? Or okay. The interpretation is in the next 10 verses, 11 to 21. We have set the table out there. What I want to do is show the linkage between Ezekiel 17 and Ezekiel 19. So let me turn over to Ezekiel 19. 19.
So while you're finding that, when I was reading this, I was just really broken. And I thought how so many times we're not in the will of God, yet around us it seems very watered.
Yeah.
Nothing is growing.
Yeah. Everything about this chapter is going to be bad news. There is no good news coming Zedekiah's way. Zedekiah will surely be remanded to the custody of Nebuchadnezzar, the one who, again, Hiphiel Galaz, the exile, and Hiphiel Melech's Zedekiah.
So what you're saying is that in terms of this breaking of the covenant, God is much more than just a witness.
Oh, yes.
He's like the enforcer.
He's the enforcer. He's the prosecutor. When you swear in the name of Yahweh not to violate a covenant, Yahweh is not just a witness. He's now the enforcer. All right, let's see that play out in chapter 19. Now, you note, now, after about 7:50, I will return the 50% papers that I've got. I'm pleased with what I've seen. You're all pretty much on the right trajectory, but there's a couple of things that I want to clear up before we get any farther along. Do you see how the first verse is set out in what looks like a narrative? It's indented only because of the quotation mark. But if you'll note, this is all left justified. That tells me that verse 1 is a narrative. And then when you get to verse 2, we have the statement and say, and then it is centered right down on the left-hand side. The genre changes between verse 1 and verse 2. One of the things that you've got to do in your paper is identify the genre. If you left justify and you continue left justifying on your Hebrew text, you're sending the message, this is narrative. Now that's fine if you're doing narrative, but most of you are doing prophecy and poetry. So what you need to do is amend your ways. Do not keep going down that path. You need to justify to a center. Look at the passage of verse 2. What was your mother? A lioness among lions. She lay down among lions. She reared her cubs. Now, this is not a narrative. very clearly, this is going to talk about whoever the princes of Israel's parent is. In this case, they use a mother lion. Okay, that's representative. The Zebidah is the name of one of the king's mothers. And I think she'd probably take offense if you called her a mother lioness. But in terms of poetry, in a painting, and that's what this is a visual painting, you can use words that mean something different. Verse 1 of chapter 17 said that this was a parable or an allegory or a riddle. In chapter 19, we're going to find out this whole chapter is a lament called a kina. Kov hirik yod nun kamatz hey. Kina. All right, so verses 2 all the way through 14d are a poem. All right, so what was your mother? A lioness among lions. She lay down among young lions and reared her cubs. When she brought up one of her cubs, he became a lion, and he learned to tear prey. Now, I know you've done your homework. I know you've studied this. Which king is this likely to be? There are 4 kings. There's Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. Which king is this likely to be? The first one, Jehoahaz, also known as Shallum. Okay, Jehoahaz, Shallum, the first king. She brought up one of her cubs. He became a lion. He learned to tear his prey. He devoured men. Verse 4. Then nations heard about it. He was captured in their pit. And they brought him with hooks to the land of Egypt. There's only one of the 4 kings that goes to Egypt, and that's Jehoahaz, Shallum. Okay? We know that from Jeremiah 7 and Jeremiah 21. Okay, so Jehoahaz, Shallum gets brought to Egypt. Verse 5. When the mother lioness saw, as she waited, that her hope was lost, she took another cub and made him a young lion. Okay, from the perspective of the people in Babylon, which king would this be? Number 2 in the hit parade. Who's number 2? Jehoiakim. Okay? I called him the king of broken covenants. He never met a covenant he didn't break. He met with the Pharaoh, and he violated that covenant. Then he met with Nebuchadnezzar, and he violated that covenant. And then he signed a covenant with a number of kings, and he violated that covenant too. So the king of shifting alliances comes to the throne. Here we are in verse 6. And he walks among the lions. He became a young lion. He tears the prey. He devours men. He destroys their fortified towers. Now, there is a footnote here. Fortified towers, or he ravaged their wives. Okay? Ravaged their wives or raped their women. It has everything to do with the text critical step. There is a very fine line between ravaged their fortresses and ravaged their women. Now, which one did he do? Well, that's the text critical step. Here's what I want you to do. Everybody's got this. There's nobody that doesn't have at least one good text issue. There's a variant or 2, maybe 3. Here's what you're supposed to do. You describe what the versions say. The Hebrew has this phrase. The Greek has this other phrase. That's step 1. That's describe. Okay? Step number 2, analyze. The Greek says the word for widows. It probably comes about because there's a Dalet Resh confusion. Perhaps what the Greek translator of the original Hebrew had a Dalet that looked like a Resh.